All I hear is that laughter. That's all that I hear. Good evening, YouTube. I feel like that awkward kid at school that missed a really good inside joke, and that everyone everyone off screen is laughing at me. Apparently, I hear you, Casey. Now, welcome to NonSequitur. I'm Kyle Curtis, joined always by Steve McRae.
Hello.
To my, I think I got that right. Nope, other way. There he is. We're going to go over a few announcements first, as always, and then we'll jump right into the discussion tonight, which is on the historicity and not hysterectomy, as I mistakenly called it yesterday, of Jesus, man, myth, or God. Tomorrow, all things, if it can go a good way and Dr. Huffman doesn't get bogged down with his caseload, which we're really hoping for you Christians out there, please pray that he doesn't. We will be having a thing we're going to call evolution peer review, and that's going to be between two doctors, one a PhD, one an MD, and that's Dr. Seigart and R.M. Huffman. They are two Christians, both doctors. However, they differ in terms of whether evolution happened or intelligent design happened. So if all things go well, that will be tomorrow at 8 o'clock. We'll keep you posted. You can follow us on Twitter to find out more. And that's at NonSec Show. That's NonSeq Show. And then Saturday, we will be joined by, this is a last-minute add-on, we'll be joined by Dr. DiMattei. He was here about 3 weeks ago to talk about contradictions in the Bible. He is a biblical scholar, and we're going to be focusing on the book of Leviticus Saturday. That will be Saturday at 8 o'clock. And then our other ancient text expert, Dr. Joshua Bowen, will be here on Sunday. And we'll be going through some of the stories that that are in the Bible, like the flood, that sort of thing, but that predate the Bible. So it goes back further, and they were first. So we're going to kind of see how those two square up. And then on our Twitter, we have a list of next week's shows. They include Monday will be Ask a Satanist. We have Darren, who is a pastor of the Church of Satan, coming by to answer your questions. Please tweet those at NonSec Show. And then Tuesday we have Weed the People, which is a debate on whether or not marijuana should be legalized. And I believe Godless Engineer, you were already getting in on that debate a little bit today.
Well, yeah, because SJ, she posted a link to an article that was in her favor. I just kind of went through it, and I pointed out how it doesn't actually support her position. Because, I mean, the entire article was about how, studies done on teens and preteens as it relates to marijuana shows that it's negatively affects their mental growth and all these other things. So I was just espousing to her that I agree that it should be treated a lot like we treat like alcohol now, but that doesn't mean that it's harmful, like, in general. And that seems to be the position she was taking.
To be candid, I couldn't get through most of these shows without it. So it's been a blessing for me. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve McRae to talk about the topic for the discussion tonight, and we'll get started.
I'm not a participant of the great weed thing. Maybe one day I will. It's legal in California. Who knows? Somebody send me a joint. I'll give it a try again. Is it even? Can you even send?
That's not how it works.
Can you send joints through the mail? I don't think so, right?
Works.
You can't do that. Don't send me anything in the mail. It's illegal, I think. Don't do that. So, anyways, tonight we're going to be talking about Jesus, man, myth, or God with Godless Engineer and Christian Anarchist, and I'm hoping that this type of discussion kind of doesn't get bogged down in the nuances of strictly talking about Josephus and Titus, Tacitus. And they just kind of like have an organic conversation between them of who has a better argument of Jesus being one, did he exist? Two, was he the Son of God? Christian Anarchist and Godless Engineer both have been here numerous times, so we're going to keep the introductions brief, but go ahead and tell them about yourself a little bit. Christian Anarchist, you go first, and then we'll have Godless Engineer tell about himself and his channel, and then we'll go right into the discussion. Oh, and by the way, I'm producing this tonight, so if there's any problem with the audio, please let me know now. Let me know how mine is, and the participants. Thanks.
Hashtag Steve's mic.
Hashtag Steve's mic.
Yeah. So I'm Christian Anarchist. I'm a Christian apologist, YouTuber, and street evangelist. And whenever, I get into debates, we're doing these debates like we are right now. And that's pretty much as short as I can make that. So
Perfect. Do you want to like throw out your channel real quick?
just Christian Anarchist. That's about it.
On YouTube.
Yep.
Okay.
Just type that in.
All right. Godless Engineer, go for it.
Well, hello, heathens. I am the Godless Engineer. If you guys don't know me, I have a channel here on YouTube where I investigate a lot of different things, mostly response videos and mean comment reads or hate comment reads. And then Casey, she's got her own show on the channel. I'd also do interviews. And one of the topics that I'm passionate about is mythicism. So like today, I released a mythicism video, and I tried to present one particular key component of the minimal mythicism, and I do that on occasion, and I'm gonna try to ramp that up a little bit as I go on, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
That sounds great. Now, do you guys want to start from the basics of whether Jesus existed, or do you want to go right into whether he's the Son of God or not? I mean, you're obviously a mythicist, so do you want to argue that he didn't exist as a person first? And then,
Are you talking to me?
yeah, I'm talking to you,
Christian?
Godless Engineer. Because
Oh,
if you want to start
yeah,
that route, then we'll have Christian Anarchist start, but he'll start with the position that Jesus was a real person, then you can
right.
rebuke that. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I take the position that he was a literary creation that was a product of the Jewish faith and the Jewish promises of a Messiah coming to redeem them and give them a new covenant.
Perfect. All right, so Christian Anarchist, that's where he's coming from. So go ahead and start from that position that you're going to argue that Jesus was an actual real being and not just a fictitious person and literary creation.
Right. So the first thing I would say, of course, thank you for agreeing to this discussion, GE. And one thing I wanted to start off is one thing that I noticed in the last debate that they had on this subject with Inspiring Philosophy, that I agree that, just because it's a majority position that Jesus existed, that alone shouldn't be a convincing case. What we should be looking at is the evidence, because, even the minority views should be challenged as long as there's compelling evidence. So I want to take the time to examine the evidence. And there's three places that I mainly want to go into. That is the New Testament documents, which I will get into, that I think are reliable eyewitness accounts. And so then there's Josephus and Tacitus as the main three forms of literary criteria. So I want to start with the issue of Josephus. The passage that has been known as in Book 18, Chapter 3, Section 3 of Antiquities of the Jews, where it says, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as to receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and Gentiles. And then Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross. Those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day." Now, the issue is that going on here that what I read to you was a abridged sort of version of this, based upon that in most of your translations, especially one done by a man named William Whiston, will include something like, "He was the Christ, for he appeared to them alive then the third day." This is an interpolation. These parts are interpolations that were inserted later. And there's a distinction between interpolation and forgery. Forgery is a type of interpolation, but not all interpolations are forgeries. But concerning the issue about this, even Louis Feldman, who was the leading Josephus scholar, did a survey of all these different people, gathering 139 different types of scholars, and a majority of them were in a partial division, while a minority was for, well, it's fully authentic and fully not authentic. But even then, just without that, examining why we consider this part of the actual passage is that this was a pattern of ancient historiography, especially that pertaining to Josephus. For example, Dr. Michael Grant, a classicist and author of the books on ancient history, noted in page 53 of the Greek and Roman historians, Information and Misinformation, the following, quote, "A further main reason why ancient historiography affirmed from its differed from its modern counterparts was provided by digressions. They were far more frequent in the Greek and Roman writings than in our own. For one thing, there was a simple technical explanation for such digressions. And here's where it gets interesting. He says, nowadays we have footnotes. The ancients did not. So that what would now be relegated to a footnote or an appendix had to appear in the text. But there was a deeper philosophical explanation. The Greek and Roman historians wanted to supply background. So in that book, in that chapter, we see a lot of mention about Pilate, and Pilate does get mentioned here. And this isn't the first time that Josephus does this. He does this regarding several other figures in his works in Book 18 and Book 20, for example. I'll pull some examples up later if we do go back down there. But even Mary Smallwood mentions in her translation of the Jewish Wars on page 2021 that one feature of Josephus's writing which may be disconcerting to the modern reader and appear inartistic is the way in which at times the narrative is proceeding at a spanking pace when it is unceremoniously cut short by a paragraph or a longer passage of material unrelated or only marginally related to the subject in hand, and then resumed equally abruptly. And so she explains the same thing, that this is basically, as she says, quote, what we relegate to notes and appendixes appeared as digressions. So this simply was just a part of Josephus's ancient writing history. And for the examples, you can look at Book 18, chapters 2 and 5, where you see different places where the flow gets broken of the passage in trying to go about a certain figure, but only to provide background concerning the reader at his specific time. Now, then you have Tacitus, which doesn't really mention too much about Jesus, only the issue of where the Christians get their title from Christus, from whom the name had origin. That's what the Annals, Book 15:44 say. And there's debate on who exactly is being referred to. Some say that this is some sort of a forgery, but in page 57 of Paul Barnett's book, Finding the Historical Christ, we read the issue where it says, quote, whereas Josephus's Testimonium Flavianum has been corrupted by interpolation, there is no reason to suspect this, the Testimonium Tacitium in Annals. The text throughout is stylistically seamless. Furthermore, no Christian would have described his fellows in Rome as a foreign cult, superstitio, needed to be checked a disease, malum, belonging to the horrible and shameful things of the world that gravitate to Rome, a people hated for their vices, flagitia, who have a hatred for the human race, odio humanae generis, and whose terrible punishment under Nero is justified. This passage reflects Tacitus's conservative values and his diagnosis of Rome's woes. So then there's also the issue about, well, what about the ranking? Because we have a stone that says prefect, but then in this it says procurator. And the same thing is done with Josephus. This is just simply an interchangeable term that they use because what was used as prefect, they now refer to as the procurator, and they're writing for a specific audience at that time who might not be familiar with the term prefect. So they will use that term, procurator, instead. Now, there's more I could go in on these, but like I said, that's just all I'm going to stop with, those two sources. Now, for the New Testament, which is what I'm going to start using because Inspiring Philosophy didn't get a chance to use it last time.
Do you want him to be able to address? Did you want him to be able to address that first before you jump from like Old Testament to New Testament?
Yeah, I mean, you're covering a lot of ground here, and I'm not getting a chance to talk at all.
Right, sure. I don't want to take this shotgun type approach. So before you even dive into something different, why don't we allow Godless and a chance to respond?
Before he does, did I hear him? Did you say spanking pace?
That was one of the things that I think it was Michael Grant that mentioned it, or it was E. Mary Smallwood.
I like that term. Okay, go ahead, Godless Engineer.
Okay, well, first off, thank you guys for letting me have this on the show here, this little debate that we're doing. I really appreciate it. But I would like to note that last time I tried to get into the New Testament evidence, but IP was the one that did not want to get into the Bible. He vehemently did not want to talk about that. So it's not that he didn't get a chance to talk about it. He didn't want to talk about it. That's the first thing I got to correct here. Another thing is I really like how Christian Anarchist, you started out by condemning an argument from authority, but then throughout your entire thing, you seem to use nothing but an argument from authority in order to substantiate the things that you're saying. Not that that's really all that different from most historicists, but I just thought that was a little bit of a funny thing that happened there. As far as Josephus goes, there's more things concerning the Testimonium Flavianum that puts it into question. It's not just the broken flow of it, which I understand that you guys are a little bit more lenient with the whole broken flow thing, but the tone is completely different in that particular passage than in the surrounding passages. Not only that, but the passage just after it seems to reference the passage before it, being that it's referencing some kind of sad calamity or a sad thing that happened in the passage after the Testimonium, which doesn't actually refer to the Testimonium, but instead it refers to the paragraph just before it, because just before it, Pilate had killed a whole bunch of Jews that were protesting him over some kind of water dispute. So, I mean, it interrupts the flow there. Not only that, but there's a lot of problems with it. Of course, you said that it was there were some interpolations that went on with the passage. I can give you the more, I guess, Jewish version of the passage, but it still doesn't explain why Josephus didn't go in and actually explain what the Christ is. At one point, you say that sometimes they include footnotes to include background information. That doesn't make sense because it only causes more questions to be asked rather than answering questions or giving background information, because his audience at that time wouldn't have known, what the Christ was to the Jews or what the Messiah was to the Jews, or several other things in the Josephine passage that there's a problem with. And then going again with the Josephine passage, it's very, very odd that there is nobody referring to this particular thing, this glowing reference to Jesus and Josephus, until like the 4th century with Eusebius. It doesn't show up in Origen or any other church documents or anything like that as a reference anywhere until the 4th century with Eusebius. Now, Eusebius has been known to forge a number of things in his own church's history, so it that puts it into suspect as well. And then you have the fact that there's really good evidence to show that the passage was actually copied off of Luke's. I'm not going to pronounce this right, but it's Luke's Emmaus or Emmaus narrative. It's the narrative after Jesus has risen from the dead, and you got two guys that are on the road to, I believe it's Damascus or something, and Jesus walks up to them and starts talking to them about this strange figure called Jesus. There's 19 total points in both of those stories that correlate to this testimonium. So it kind of seems like I mean that's very improbable that those 19 commonalities between the two would exist independent like of each other. And then let's see, for the the more Jewish version of Josephus, it's been definitively proven by a historicist that all versions of that particular version of it stems from Eusebius. So the only version that we have of this particular passage in Josephus is by Eusebius. He's the first one to use it, to document it. The people that had the same documents from Josephus prior to that, being Origen, never mentions it, even though he has multiple reasons in which to bring up the fact that Josephus mentions Jesus. No, and it doesn't have to be against a mythicist or anything like that in his time in order for it to do that. Now, on to Tacitus. With Tacitus, he was in communication with Pliny Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger was a leader in in an adjacent portion of the country. He was another leader, and he ran across Christians and started interrogating them. Now, he had never heard of Christians before, and if he had have heard of Christians, he would have heard from his uncle, I believe it was, Pliny the Elder, who was actually around the area where Jesus was at the time of Jesus' supposed crucifixion. No, hold on. Sorry. It wasn't around the time of Jesus' crucifixion. It was around the time of the burning of Rome, where Tacitus says that the Christians were blamed and all of that. Just Tacitus's general reference here. He would have known about it, but I mean, he didn't. He could have informed Tacitus about the existence of Christians and whatnot, and so that's a possible way that he could have gotten information about Christians existing at the time. Now, I get that you don't want to go to the extent of the Christus or Christians being like an interpolation and changing it over to Christos and Christ and whatnot. The thing that I would say here is still Christ is a title. And he more than likely would have referred to him by his name of Jesus of Nazareth, or however you would have mentioned his actual name. You wouldn't have actually mentioned his title. But even giving you the idea that Christ was mentioned and all of that, it doesn't actually cement Jesus in history. All that says is that they were Christians in Rome at the time. But there's another aspect to this particular one. You do not see Tacitus being used by other Christians until much, much later in history. So it's kind of funny when you have other Christians, other Christian historians that have a reason to mention it, like with Paul, or was it Paul's persecution in Rome? There was a Pauline text where it talks about Nero burning Christians or whatnot, and it would have been mentioned there. And so you don't see anybody mentioning it up until much later in history. And so I mean that makes it a little bit suspect, but I mean again, if you're not wanting to consider all of the sources that we would expect to see it in, but we don't actually see it in, and you want to regard Tacitus as the actual, like what it says in Tacitus and not some kind of interpolation, it only cements like Christians being in Rome at the time, which no other historian records, like Christians being in Rome or being blamed for the fire of Rome or anything like that. It's possible that, Tacitus got bad information from somebody or whatnot. It could have been that way. I'm not saying that there's any definitive proof that it was that way. What I'm saying is that it's far less likely that he was actually giving some kind of historical context for a Jesus. And I think that Tacitus's excerpt there doesn't give my view any kind of credence, and definitely doesn't give your view any kind of credence. And then I believe it was Suetonius who actually mentioned about Christians being, or not Christians, sorry, but Christians being in or around Rome about 10 years earlier. And there was an instigator called Christus. And so, I mean, it kind of makes sense that if he was instigating shit then, he would have been instigating shit later too. So, I mean, there is a reference to Christus. Christus is an actual name in history, unlike Christ, which is a title. And then you brought up the prefect thing. I don't consider that to be a very strong argument. I mean, even if you consider them to be interchangeable there, it still doesn't lend any credence to either your case or my case.
Wow, you definitely unpacked all that. So, Christian Anarchist, I mean, he responded to pretty much every one of your points. So, do you want to do a quick rebuttal first?
Yeah, I do want to do a quick
and then he can,
rebuttal
and then you go
before
on
I
to
get to the New
Testament.
Testament.
I would love to get to the New Testament because we didn't get to it last time, and I think
Right.
from what I remember, I think G is correct. It wasn't so much IP wasn't allowed to go to the
he was going an evidentialist approach.
He didn't want to, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm familiar with how IP does his apologetic method. I do want to go over one thing, real quick before I do start, and that is
Well,
asking.
hold on before you
Sure.
start. Sorry to interrupt. I would prefer it if I let Anarchist here respond to my points, and then I'll just leave it up to people who are watching to make up their mind who has the stronger case, because
Exactly.
I don't want to really focus on this.
Sounds good. I think that's fine for everybody. So go ahead and do a
Right.
quick rebuttal, couple minutes, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then we'll go right
Right.
into New Testament stuff. Sound good?
Right. So I just do want to ask real quick about this particular passage in Book 18, Chapter 2, in which this reads from Josephus. When Gratus had done those things, he went back to Rome after he had tarried in Judea 11 years, when Pontius Pilate came as his successor. Do you think this fits nicely with the book that's there, or what the quote is? Do you think there's anything suspicious about that?
I mean, I don't know the passage, so I mean, I thought we were discussing Josephus, like
Right.
the Testimonium Flavianum. So
Right, and that's
I don't see a problem with that one.
right. Well, the point is also that you see a bunch of generals and such being mentioned, or the prefix of procurators that are in succession here, and Pontius Pilate is then introduced into this as if he's, part of the story and all that. But then by the time you get to chapter 3, then it puts, but now Pilate, the procurator of Judea, almost introducing him as if he is a new character into the story. And this is why that seems to, for some people, they even, because of that, this one verse here, they consider this in the same way with the Testimonium Flavianum, because it seems like a patchwork that, well, if it's supposed to be Josephus, seems like he's being introduced formally in the next chapter, why treat him as if he's already been part of the story? So this is another part of the thing. When I say I'm citing all these people that point out that this is part of Josephus's style, I'm not just simply relying on an argument from authority. For one, I'm just simply citing the evidence in their own words, so that way I don't plagiarize or take their quote and try to make it mine when they deserve the credit for doing that work. And plus, whenever I cite that quote, I go into examples. I named a few by only titles and numbers, but I didn't go into the actual quote like I just did right there. So like I said, if you want more of these, I can supply those. Eusebius may have interpolated some of the Testimonium Flavianum, not forged. Like I said, there's a difference between the two. But again, we also have manuscripts that are outside of Eusebius, such as an Arabic copy, that are shorter and do not contain some of the suspected verses. And in the field of textual criticism, if you have a manuscript or a reading that is shorter, it's always assumed to be the earliest. That's always been the rule in any form of when we were looking at the early critical work. And the issue about Tacitus and why not reference the name? It would have been more likely. Why would it have to have been the name? Why couldn't he have referenced the title? These are things I don't see any evidence as to why it has to be this over another thing when he's dealing with the title of where they get their name from, which would make more sense. They weren't called Jesusites or Nazarites. These were Christians or Christians, depending on which of the textual variants you go with. Also, why must we see them being used by other Christians? Again, this is not any sort of a thing that's provided as proven, as something that's solid. I don't see any reason why a Christian is required to use this in order for it to be established as, this is reliable or authentic, as then we can do that with other ancient works and would not necessarily work.
Okay, well, hang on. Let's. I don't want to give you a few minutes to kind of do a rebuttal, and I don't want to spend another 20 minutes on this particular topic. So how about we just jump right into the New Testament thing? But instead of having like 5 or 10 minutes to talk about it, why don't you give one thing from the New Testament that you think is convincing to the existence of Jesus and would would seem to invalidate mythicism. And that way we're not having like 5-10 minute blocks of each other. You guys have a more back and forth dialogue. So what do you think from the New Testament you want to talk about with Godless Engineer that you think will demonstrate that Jesus was an actual person?
Right. Well, I would think the Gospels, for one, would be a good case of that, for relying on Matthew and John being eyewitnesses. Mark is getting his information from an eyewitness of Peter, and then you have Luke gathering his from multiple different eyewitness accounts, as he proclaims in Luke chapter 1.
All right. Godless, you want to address that?
Oh, I do.
Real quick, I want to thank somebody who just donated $100 to our super chat. Jam, by the way, who actually will be having a hangout with her shortly as an after show, I believe on my channel after this.
Yes.
Okay, but I want to thank him because it just came up. Thank you very much for that, and people that have been Patreons and people have been supporting us through Streamlabs, because we don't have super chat because YouTube has been uber slow across the board on multiple different channels. They're saying now it's not going to be this month; it's going to be till June. They have a lot of backlog, but anyways, I want to throw that out there. Thank you very much for that. I don't want to interrupt you guys, but I have to appreciate those kind of things very much. So, God, let's go ahead and address this thing from the New Testament.
Okay. Well, for one thing, of course, I don't adhere to the whole idea that they were written by firsthand accounts. For one, one of the possible sources, which I mean, Christian Anarchist didn't really give any reasons as to why he thinks that, like, let's say, Mark was an assistant to Peter, and he was recording firsthand accounts from Peter. Christian Anarchist, could you tell me why you specifically think that?
Why Mark is getting his information from an eyewitness?
Right.
Right. I forget who exactly are the 2 or 3 church fathers that mention the quote about who is attributed to these gospels, and some of whom were even taught by people that were taught by the disciples themselves. So they're getting this information from there in the line, that, John wrote his, Mark wrote his, but not as an eyewitness, but that he was receiving Peter's testimony and writing it down under his name as Mark. Luke wrote his, gathering information from other people, and then Matthew wrote his gospel in the Hebrew dialect in reference to using languages and terms in the Greek that would only be a familiar concept with the Jewish people since he was a Jew.
Okay. Just to refresh your memory, it's Papias. Papias was the answer we were looking for.
That's one of them.
I mean, he's the earliest one, and he's the source of saying that Mark was an assistant to Peter and was recording what Peter was saying. Papias is known to take hearsay as being more truthful than actual evidence. So, I mean, Papias isn't really a good source to go from. He's basically like a 2nd century 9/11 truther in that respect. I mean, like, just for instance, one thing that's not regarding to the Jesus question or the Mark question, he described a guy basically like a horrible anime kind of torture. I mean, he describes a guy as having like a huge head that with sunken eyes that even doctors couldn't detect his eyes, and he apparently had worm-infested genitals, and whenever he peed, he'd pee out worms everywhere, and he just he would basically hear something and take it as truth. And so you have Papias here that is saying that, Mark was the assistant to Peter and everything. But there's a lot of problems with that whole idea. And for one thing, Peter was very Torah oriented. Like he was very Torah observant, whereas the Mark gospel is very Pauline in nature. So, I mean, you have that really big difference there. So if Mark was recording what Peter was saying, then he was basically lying about what he was writing down. And, I think Peter would have been able to, I don't know, look over his shoulder at his work or something. I mean, I don't know, but it doesn't make sense that if Mark was, writing from a firsthand witness or whatnot, he would be writing things that were very much, against the Torah. He was at odds with Peter over the Torah. Another thing that's a problem is that Peter would have been talking preaching rather in Hebrew or Aramaic, whereas Mark was written in Greek. And then to get into the actual I guess timeline of how the parts of the Gospels were written, you have Paul that was writing in the 50s, and Paul actually has Jesus only being revealed to him through revelation in Scripture. There's multiple verses in Paul's work that suggest that say this directly. He completely emphasizes that he did not get his information from any person on earth, that he only got his information from revelation in Scripture. There is a part in Galatians where he goes to Jerusalem to confirm the gospel that he's spreading, but he did not receive any or much information from the other disciples there, or not disciples, but apostles there. At least, and I say little to none on that one because we can't really discern what he might have gathered from like people on earth. So we have to take him at his word as to, where he gets his information, because we don't have anything to suggest otherwise. And then another thing is that Papias, he's only referenced by other church fathers in history. So there's kind of an odd, I don't know why they would want to erase Papias. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. Back to Paul, though. So we have Paul writing in the 50s, and then you've got Mark being written about the 70s. The reason why we say this is because of certain claims that are made in Mark, like the destruction of the Jewish temple that doesn't happen until the 70s. So you have to figure that it was probably written between like late 60s to early 70s. And then you have Matthew and Luke that are based off of Mark. Now, Luke could have possibly used Matthew and Mark, but I know that's up for debate. Of course, the Mark gospel, as well as the other ones, have this Q document that they normally reference to as being the document that they all pull from. But for the most part, Matthew is copying Luke, or Matthew is copying Mark, and then Luke is copying both of those guys. And another way that we can tell that is that Mark starts off with a very basic kind of Christ, and it's more of a Christ that Paul might have agreed with. I mean, you don't have any birth story. You don't have really a lot of magical things. You also have Christ being a lot weaker. At one point in Mark, he talks about how Jesus could do no works at this one town. But then later on in Matthew, you see that he chooses not to do any good works in that particular town. And I mean, you see a progression of magic throughout the Gospels, which would make it the Mark Gospel be the earliest one because of the fact that the other two copy off of Mark, making them not independent. But even Mark is questionably not independent because you have Paul writing in the 50s. And then you've got the Gospel of John that's really kind of out there, and it's really its own separate Christian group that has a lot of different differences that are key to the theology of their gospel. So the Gospels, in my opinion, are not a very good piece of evidence for the historicity of Christ.
Go ahead, Sia, just go ahead and back and forth on that particular issue. I think this is actually a good issue from the New Testament to really kind of stick with.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, you keep focusing on Papias and all that with regards as if this has to be where it's originated, when another idea is, well, you have also then Irenaeus, which sure, he's a bit later, but then who was he a disciple of? He was the disciple of Polycarp, of whom was a first century figure, in which the only surviving letter we have, I forget if which church he wrote to, but all we have is his one epistle, and he's from the first century. And he was taught by the disciple John. So one issue is, while sure, Papias could be one source that gives this out, but only by the written documents that we have so far, could also be, well, then it's also possible from Polycarp, though Polycarp we only have one letter that we know of that he wrote about, of whom he could have also gotten his information from John, since we know from sources that he was taught by the disciple John. And so we have that chain in which Irenaeus is getting his information, since he was a student of John. So I'd see that as a very viable thing, and I don't put too much of my trust and faith just on Papias alone. In fact, I wasn't even going to mention Papias at all in this entire discussion. So another thing you said was that Peter's theology, I'm assuming when you say that, you refer to like in 1st and 2nd Peter, though if I remember correctly, you did say once that you believe 2nd Peter is a forgery, differs from Mark's gospel. And I would want to cite some evidence for that, because when you say that, Peter was Torah only type of person, Acts 15, he's condemning an act of people that are Torah only kind of people, because he's condemning at the Council of Jerusalem, in which James is residing over, that he's condemning the act of circumcision unto salvation, of which these people are like, well, this is in our Torah, to be circumcised. These Gentiles need to be circumcised. And Peter takes a position in which he's kind of against that issue. So if he really was Torah only, he would have been, for what these guys were doing. Now, I know that later on it talks about, keeping to dietaries and such. That's only in terms of peace reconciliation. But otherwise, when he is referring to a Gentile audience in some of his epistles and writings, he does use what seems to be similar language with what we see in Paul and what we see in Mark. I have read I haven't read the entire Bible, but I have at least read enough from Peter in comparison to what Paul and the Gospel of Mark had written down. Another point is that not only did Paul confirm his information with Peter, but James also, the brother of Jesus, as he points out in the very next verse, said that he saw no other disciples or apostles except the James, who he says is either the Lord's brother or the brother of the Lord, depending on which translation you have, which again is an off-the-cuff comment for some people, whether they want to believe he was God or not, that this is in reference to Jesus, because obviously based on the context of Galatians, people know who people like Paul and what he believed would have been referring to at that specific point in time.
Okay, my turn?
Sure.
Okay. So I'll start. I'll go from what the last subject you brought up, and I'll go backwards in time. So James, the brother of the Lord. I love this particular reference. I really do, mainly because there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that is the kind of brother that they were talking about, and I have multiple points for this. For one thing, I know that you Christian anarchists like to go back to the original Greek. If you go back to the original Greek in the Septuagint of this particular portion of Galatians, or what? Sorry, not in the Septuagint. If you go back to the original Greek of this text, you will find that when they're referencing the brother, it's actually indistinguishable from blood brother or brother, as in another person of your own religion. I mean, you can search that up if you want to, but and if you want me to, I mean, I can get Steve a link and he can put it up on the screen or something, and we can investigate that together. But it's indistinguishable the way that it's written, so it doesn't help your case. It doesn't help my case at all either. But also, I would like to point out that in Paul's theology, brothers and sisters in the Lord are just other Christians. He makes this known throughout his theology, and it's very unlikely that his theology, before writing it down on paper, would have really changed that much, in that respect. He asserts that the only way that you can be an apostle is by first others. And so basically you have this theology in Paul where everybody that's a Christian is a brother. And we see this in other religions prior to this too. Like with baptism, you get baptized into a religion and you become a sort of a familial or you develop a familial bond with that religion. And so they're often referred to in such ways. So it's not really out there for it to say James, a brother of the Lord, or the brother of the Lord, or whatnot, because it's not distinguishing what kind of brother in that particular context. And with the words that are actually used in Greek, we don't get that kind of indication. Like, it's left up in the air. You would need some kind of clarifying statement around that. Then going back to how Peter was at odds with Mark, or Paul rather. If you go to Galatians 2, everybody, please turn in your books to Galatians 2. You will see Paul opposed. Huh?
I thought you'd never ask.
Paul opposing Cephas, who Cephas, if for you, those of you that don't remember, is Peter. And if you go to verse 14, it says, "When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all, 'You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs?'" So, he, regardless of the circumcision point, which this particular part doesn't cover, it does show that he is Torah observant. And the Markan gospel is just moving past, the Torah is moving past all of that because, a new covenant is being developed. Why would you need the old covenant if you have a new covenant kind of deal? So, that would be my responses to your two things.
Okay. So I did take a quick look at it since I do have a copy of the Greek lexicon, and it surprisingly does make distinctions between the terms that are used. In fact, there are 6 distinct different definitions based upon the Greek word of adelphos that is used. They can mean simple brother bond, and even uses examples from the Septuagint, like Genesis 14:16, 1 Samuel 20:29. Along those examples of a brother-like person born of the same parents, Galatians chapter 1, verse 19. In the context of when it mentions a fellow believer united to another by the bond of affection, so most frequently of Christians, constituting as if it were but a single family. It mentions several verses like Matthew 23, verse 8, John 21, verse 23, but you don't see Galatians gets put into this. You see Galatians 1, 2 that can be mentioned into this, but you don't see anything about the other particular verse. There are distinctions within the surrounding context of the Greek, and that's why it helps to formulate these constructs by showing when it gets that switch. Now, it's a technical lexicon, so in other words, I can't read some of the stuff since it puts that only in Greek. But based on the fact that I trust that what is in the Greek is being elaborated on, especially for the academic scholars that can read that, unlike someone like me who doesn't know first-year Greek, then I'm going to go with the issue about the lexicons. Just like in the same way, if I only go with a basic concept of evolution but don't understand certain aspects to defend it myself, I will go with what some of the biologists and scientists have stated in scientific peer-reviewed papers and such.
Okay, but there's no reason given for why you take that particular definition. You have to understand. Right now, I'm thinking argument from authority or the dictionary argument that you're using here. I mean, there's just that's not a compelling argument, at least for me. I don't know about the audience here, but for me, I just hear that as an argument from authority. You're taking this one particular book that labels, that particular definition with this particular verse, and that's kind of a thin argument.
All I'm simply saying is this is simply, because you mentioned this is the issue of the Greek, and there's other people that seem to get it a different way. I'm saying that people can examine that themselves. I just simply point out the source that people themselves, especially those who have known Greek, they can investigate these issues themselves. Like you said in the beginning, the issue is for people to also examine what we're saying, and I'm just simply allowing that to be done.
No, I agree, but I don't know if you remember, part of my argument was that it doesn't help my position and it doesn't help your position because it's indeterminate, like it's indistinguishable. But you're saying that it's distinguishable just because, one particular lexicon written by people that were interpreting it one particular way. But if you take a look at the actual text, how it's actually used, there's no way to tell which particular definition it's using.
I could probably do that if I'm just looking at the text, whether it be within the Greek or within the English. That's what I'm saying this entire time. Is that point
out in the Grecian text, which word does it mean blood brother or blood relative?
I'm saying it is adelphos. In the same way for adelphos.
I know it's adelphos, but you need some other kind of context around there that tells you that it's blood related, because adelphos is like it means the familial type, like blood brother, but it also means just part of a group.
Right.
So you need to be able to distinguish between those two. And in that particular passage, you just don't get that in that particular context.
Mm-hmm.
So point out where else in that context that it points out that it's a blood brother.
Again, I've already stated what I said, and I'm just going by from what I'm reading of it in the English text as well as partially of the Greek, and going by what the lexicon says on the matter. And I don't see any problem with doing that in the same way with the issue about taking the issue of science.
Okay.
So you're just putting forth as this is what the scholars would say.
Yeah, and that that if anyone wanted to examine it for themselves, that's the point of the purpose why that's out there for those that can and want to examine it. That's the whole purpose of what I do with the issue of debating in general, is that we're trying to lay out a case and point out what our information and such is, so that people can examine it as well. So
I definitely suggest people going on Google and searching for the Greek version of Galatians 1:19, and you can get a side-by-side Greek word, and then you can click a link and you can go to the actual definition of that word.
Mm-hmm. As well as check out the Nessialan 28 that's online.
Have you guys tackled all that you want about the gospel part before we move on to the next set?
Well, just to clarify, that was like if the issue was just simply the authorship of who the gospel authors were, if that was the only thing, then I mean, I think we can say the same about other works of antiquity, that if we have that, then should we then discredit or discount any sort of reliability of the issue? But even then, I think there's definitely a lot to consider besides just that. Rather, if we don't have like the credit card information, if you will, about who these people were, or what they're, who exactly wrote them.
Okay, well, you're free to expound on that if you'd like.
Well, I mean, I think that there needs to be independent, sources for Jesus. I mean, I consider Paul to be the the best source that somebody could use, which would include the Galatians portion right here. But as I explained before, if you take that particular idea in the greater context of Paul's theology, you will find that Paul considers any common Christian to be a brother of the Lord. Like I said, if you consider just his basic theology. So in that particular section that we were just discussing, James would just be another Christian out there. But as far as the reliability of the Gospels go, the Gospels were not written by firsthand accounts. They were no earlier than like the late 60s to early 70s, with John being written between 90 and I believe it's 110 or the current estimations for that. But you got Paul that was writing in the 50s. And I focus on Paul a lot, mainly because he never has Jesus existing on earth. The way that Paul is revealed the way Jesus is revealed to Paul is through revelation and scripture. So I think that it's way more probable that Paul was a schizotypal person who regularly had visions and whatnot, and would use visions in order to get over any kind of cognitive dissonance that he was going over, which there are scientific studies to show that schizotypal people actually do. So if you consider the possibility for Paul to be a schizotypal, and he's persecuting Christians, right, because they're basically trying to replace his religion. If he is suffering some kind of cognitive dissonance from that, he's going to have a vision to reconcile that, and he would, he could turn his whole demeanor around and start professing Christianity if he had this schizotypal vision of a Christ. Also, part of Paul's theology is the fact that the only people that can be apostles or really know Christ are the ones that Christ has revealed himself through Scripture and Revelation. Paul is very adamant about the fact that he sees Jesus through revelation and Scripture, and that he gets none of his information from man at all. So there's that. And then also you have Philo that writes earlier than him that actually has this Christ figure who he also calls Jesus, that was written before Jesus would have been a thing. You have him writing and basically laying out the basic structure of what Jesus is. I mean, I can find my notes and recite exactly what he says, but I mean, like he talks about this Messiah figure being the agent of creation, being the firstborn son of man, and all these other things. And he's got a lot of other like theology around it. But the big thing is here is that Philo's a Jew, and you also have in Mark. It starts out saying that he gets his information from a revelation in Isaiah. And from there, I mean, it's pretty much a blueprint from prophecies that are in the Old Testament. And you can link just about every single major plot point in Mark's gospel to that. And since Mark's gospel is the basis for Matthew and Luke, that means that those are not independent and are based on Mark. So you have to only consider Mark as far as the gospels go. And he wasn't written until, 70. And so that puts it out of the realm of first-hand eyewitnesses and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, John's definitely not written by first-hand witnesses. So, yeah.
Christian Anarchist?
Yeah, so that's definitely a good bit to take in. So I do want to at least ask one-by-one questions for a couple moments. So you mentioned the issue about the dating of the Gospels, that considers one other factor. Do you believe that Muhammad was a historical figure, that he existed?
Right now, I would say that he probably was. I know that's there's been some contention lately as to whether or not he actually was historical, but I mean, I haven't really looked into that.
Do you know when the hadith, especially with Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, as well as the earliest biographies of Muhammad, were written?
I don't know. This is a discussion on Jesus, so no, I wouldn't.
Right.
I wouldn't have prepared for that.
Right. So it's 100 years after the death of Muhammad that these things would have been written down, and it's because of these things that there are people that are doubting the existence of Muhammad. Yet there is plenty of evidence based upon, well, a name of Muhammad is mentioned 4 times within the Quran, and the fact that the oral transmission of these people who preserved the issue, the tradition of what they believed Muhammad and all these others said, in the oral tradition passed down until the writing down from, say, Imam Bukhari, the Imam Muslim, and all these other different hadiths that write down and record of the hadith, as well as even the biographies that contain some of the truths of Muhammad. We can still consider those reliable today based on some factors, like I said, the oral tradition for one. And the same thing can be applied to something that was in a shorter period of time compared to the Gospels and when they wrote after the death of Jesus, and they're still within the first century period and not on to another century. So what are your thoughts on that in comparison to the existence of Muhammad with the information that's shows of him or talks of him versus the Gospels and their information of Jesus?
Well, I mean, like I said before, Muhammad, the whole discussion on Muhammad doesn't really have any kind of bearing here as far as Jesus goes. I mean, I haven't prepared any kind of material or any kind of research on Muhammad and how accurate those particular things are. So what I do know, though, is that Mark wouldn't have been an independent gospel itself, but it is the earliest gospel. He would have both Philo and Paul in which to pull from. We also know that there were earlier there were other manuscripts, earlier where people had written down this gospel. And, so he was pulling from that, obviously. But what I'm saying is that the Gospels wouldn't have been written until 70, and so they weren't written by eyewitnesses. Like, it would have been oral tradition, and we know that oral tradition can change very fast. And also, with Paul, Paul was writing in the 50s. That's closer than the Gospels, and even he says that Jesus was revealed to him after Jesus died and never while on earth, and he's only gotten his information from the Scriptures and from Revelation. So, I mean, even if you want to put it like within 20 years of when Jesus supposedly died, you still have people that are sitting there and they're saying that Jesus was only revealed after he was crucified, died, and buried, or after he rose again. And but this also has prominent place in the 2nd century, very early 2nd century, with Ignatius of Antioch. He has a totally different gospel than any of the gospels that we know now. He's working off of something that has been erased from history, and he has it to where Mary, like the virginity of Mary and Jesus being born and his death being hidden from the world in general, and it's only being revealed through revelation that people even know that Jesus existed. So, I mean, this whole idea is pervasive through, and it's actually the first idea that we see about Jesus.
Okay, let's go on that.
Real quick, Christian Anarchist. Let's say we grant you that it is true that Muhammad existed and those records of him were correct. How would that still get you to Jesus' existence?
I was just simply seeing if he would, based on what I had told him, then say or considered if Muhammad existed or not, based on just simply that information. That's all I was trying to get at, in concern with what was stated earlier about the existence of Jesus and the reliability of the Gospels.
Okay.
Right. So go into what you say, because I did see your video this morning about Ignatius's Gospel, where I'm trying to figure out where this is supposedly some unknown gospel that Ignatius had either come up with or that he's getting it from someone. Where do you get that? Because I've read multiple times that same epistle from Ignatius, and I have never at once gotten that. This is something completely new to me.
Okay, well, I mean, for one thing, the fact that Mary and Jesus's death being hidden from everybody, especially the quote unquote prince of this world, being hidden is definitely not part of any gospel that we know now. The whole idea that Jesus appeared as a really, really bright star just out of nowhere that was brighter than any of the stars, including the sun and the moon in the sky, that's not part of the actual any of the gospels. And then it goes in to explain the effects of Jesus rising, from the dead, and being that he destroyed the prince of this world, which basically in the gospels we have Jesus defeating death but not defeating the devil. Whereas in Ignatius's thing, he defeats the evil, which would have been the devil. This is also paralleled in the ascension of Isaiah, where Isaiah is called up to the heavens and Jesus descends from the upper heavens to the lower heavens and is crucified by the devil in the lower heavens, and then he resurrects in the lower heavens in order to ascend to the upper heavens. And that's the ascension of Isaiah and this gospel that Ignatius is using are very similar in the whole aspect of what happened to this Christ figure and why is he just a celestial thing. The star in the sky is evidence that they believed in a celestial Jesus. The fact that he emphasizes that it was revealed to them seems to indicate that it was only through revelation that people were told about Jesus' sacrifice. So, I mean, that entire thing does not map directly to any gospel that we know. I mean, there are some core tenets like Jesus resurrected, born of a virgin, and whatnot. But I mean, there are very key aspects to the Ignatius gospel that do not appear anywhere in current gospel literature.
Okay, well, first of all, there's us just to be. Why is it a gospel and not just simply some general story or epistle? I don't see anywhere where this is some sort of a gospel or anything of the sort. I think that's stretching things way too far.
Well-
And as for whether or not this is just something that he's getting from some other source, I believe he is getting this from other sources. First Corinthians is where I see a lot of the parallels that are mentioned in here. First Corinthians chapter 2 mentions the issues about the mysteries, for example. And then you have First Corinthians 15 that mentions the defeat of death, which the Bible prophesies about, and there is mentions of Jesus defeating death, not just simply the prince of power, but also the issue of what they refer to as the wages of sin is death, and that Christ conquering death so that people be redeemed through him. So there are several instances within the biblical text that mentions, especially at First Corinthians. I even consulted this with a friend of mine before the debate. We just simply went over the Bible, didn't go to scholars or anything. We just consulted the Bible and reading First Corinthians. And if you just read First Corinthians, you'll find some parallels in regards to what is being spoken of in the issue of what Ignatius is writing and what's founded in Scripture. There are some times, though, he does what I see many of the early church fathers does, and unfortunately for sometimes it causes them to go into false doctrines as a result that they actually believe it. They will over-exaggerate on certain aspects, such as the mentioning of the star and such. They're simply trying to do what some Christians at the time back then did, and that is to emphasize the glory of God at that point. But they are mostly getting their skeleton, their base work from the Scriptures. They are writing this based upon the Scriptures, as the early church fathers say. They shall not utter a statement unless they can find support of it from the Bible and from the Scriptures. So clearly we see in First Corinthians, if you want some examples, I'll try to find that while you can mention some other points. But I don't want to stay on this particular issue about Ignatius the whole time.
Well, no, I said that there are certain portions that are common to like the Gospels that we know now. Mm-hmm. I mean, that I admitted that, so I don't know.
Well, not the Gospels. This is from the Epistle of First Corinthians, not the Gospels.
Well, no, I understand that, but I'm assuming that First Corinthians even made it into the Bible because it was cohesive with the Gospels. Considering, which I don't know, was First Corinthians, was that written by Paul?
Yeah, that was written by Paul.
Okay. So, I mean, that's part of Paul's theology. So, I mean, I would totally expect that. But also with Ignatius, I mean, he was writing right there at the cusp of relevant historians being, in the early second century. So, I mean, with how early he was writing, between 100 and 120, I mean, I would expect to see, at least some kind of cohesiveness with the existing theology of Paul. So, I mean, that's not really against my point. I'm saying that there are elements to that particular thing that don't match any gospel that we have now. And I don't know how you define gospel, but gospel is just the good news. I mean, there were gospels of a lot of different people and things back then. So, I mean, anything that refers to the quote unquote good news of Jesus Christ, which is exactly what Ignatius was presenting there, is going to be a gospel. So,
so I'm clear, you weren't referring to like a gospel according to Ignatius or to some other figure, but rather just simply gospel, period.
No, it's a gospel that we don't have now, and it only it's only relevant or it only really appears in Ignatius. But you can also see elements of it in the Ascension of Isaiah, which is also a first century document.
A first century and second century. It has multiple authors that contributed to it and added things later on.
Okay, so I was just referring to the earliest redaction that we can go to, and that's in the first century.
Right. So concerning then the issue about we mentioned Paul several times. What about 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 3 through 4, which is supposedly, from what I've heard, considered an early statement concerning the issue of Jesus, regardless of the fact that, of course, you wouldn't believe that he was, resurrected or anything in concern how they affirmed prophecy in any of those regards. Would you say that even outside of that, as a skeptic, still see that because of an early mention of Christ by somebody, that this is something.
Well, no, what was the Bible verse again? I
First,
thought that you might read it, but
1 Corinthians 15, verse 3 through 4, which is, "For I passed unto you as most important what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures."
yeah, could you please repeat the according to the Scriptures part again?
Yeah, according to the Scriptures, that he died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried,
Right.
that he was raised on the
I'm
third.
trying to point out that he received it as he received, or he gave it as he received it, which was according to the Scriptures, and it's also through revelation. Coming from a skeptical outside opinion, I'm looking at that and it totally meshes with everything that I've been saying, that Paul got his information from the Scriptures. He reinforces constantly throughout his theology that he only gets it from Scriptures and revelation, that he gets it from no man. He literally says that at one point, that I have received this through no man and only through revelation and Scriptures. So
you're saying that when you see the term according to the Scriptures, that it's not simply referring to how in their theology viewed it as an issue of according to the Scriptures when a certain event happens. It's not we're borrowing from there, but rather that this is in fulfillment of something that is mentioned within the Scriptures.
So you're saying that according to the Scriptures is actually in fulfillment of the Scriptures.
When they mention something like that, yes, because they mention the issue of Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, referring that there are passages that make of a prophecy of the death of Christ, and then the same thing is mentioned in the next verse of being raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures.
Okay, well, I mean, I feel like that's a bit of a fallacious reading of that, because that means that you're reading it as, oh, this means that, Jesus did exist and that he fulfilled these things from the Scriptures, whereas as it's actually written, it says that he died according to the Scriptures, meaning that it was from the Scriptures, and that's how he received the information. What do you say about the fact that he says that he got his information from no man and only from Scriptures and revelation?
Yeah, and I think just simply looking at it within think about the 21st century American mindset into a first century ancient Jewish context of when he's writing these things, and as a Jew who is very devout and dedicated and is writing these, when they used these phrases of according to the Scriptures or as the Scriptures saith, they are referencing an issue as something that is mention of a prophecy, and they're connecting it back to there. They're not saying that they're necessarily getting it from there. When he says what I also received, the issue is in reference to, as he explains earlier within the 1 Corinthians, about his encounter with Jesus, those sorts of things that he's getting this from, as you say, the revelation part. So I would agree the received part definitely is a reference to the revelation, but I don't think in the same way that he's getting or making something, getting all his information just specifically from the Scriptures. He has a memory of Scripture in which whenever something has occurred, he remembers that something happened, and it's in a fulfillment of prophecy, or that it's connected to what, if I were to look at this from a skeptical perspective, what his superstition would have been and what he believed and how he sees this.
Okay. So, I mean, right now I'm taking it as you're saying that Paul is lying to us in the Bible.
Where have I said that?
Because Paul literally states that he received his information from no man and only Scriptures, but you're saying that, oh, he got some of his information from Scripture, but he also got his information from people here on earth.
And what's the verse that says that he's getting this from no man but Scripture?
Well, hold on. I can look it up real quick.
Okay.
And while he does that, guys, as we near the 90-minute mark, here in about 20 minutes, we're going to do a Q&A with these guys. So if you have any questions, you can tweet those at NonSequitur Show or leave them in the live chat, and we'll pick them up there.
And while he's doing that, there's a quick question, simple question. Is there anybody during the contemporary time of Jesus that wrote about Jesus from a non-extra like an extra biblical source. Is that kind of the contention? I know there has been like 50 years afterwards, 100 years afterwards, but during his time, do you know of any source that wrote about him contemporary-wise?
No.
Okay.
Only except the issue not even that same. So yeah, no, there's no contemporary source that was during the lifetime of Jesus.
Just afterwards.
That writes about him.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, it's Huh?
I was just saying, are you good to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's Galatians 1:11 through 12.
1:11 through 12. Now I want you to know, brothers, that the gospel preached by me is not based on human thought, for I did not receive it from a human source, and I was not taught it, but it came by revelation from Jesus Christ. I don't see where it says. I don't see where it says. Well, I don't see where it says scriptures there. I said revelation, which is what
Well, that would just be a semantics thing, wouldn't it?
Well, the issue is that he says a revelation from Jesus Christ when the issue about the scriptures in concern of the discernment of revelation that was received to the people, the prophets, it was mostly the Father and not the second person of the Trinity of Jesus Christ that gave.
Is there any difference there? I mean,
very much so that even a first century Jew at that time would have come to that conclusion when they read something like concerning revelation from some figure and such. Then yeah,
I don't know, GE.
You literally said, show me where in Paul's writings does he say that he gets it from no man.
Right.
I literally showed you that, and then you move the goalpost.
I didn't move the goalpost. I agree that he got it from no human thought. It came from no human source.
Can you read the whole passage again one more time from Galatians?
Now I want you to know, brothers, that the gospel preached by me is not based on human thought, for I did not receive it from a human source, and I was not taught it, but it came by revelation from Jesus Christ.
Human source is the key word there.
Yeah.
It's not the thought aspect; it's the human source part.
And that's why I stated human source right after I said that.
Right. That means that no actual person gave him this gospel. He got it from Jesus Christ and through revelation.
He's claiming direct revelation, right?
Right. It's a direct revelation by Jesus. And in other passages, he cites both revelation and scriptures. And he would have been reading the scriptures and getting revelations from Jesus about it. I mean, I don't understand why you think you didn't move the goalpost there.
Well, I don't see where this issue is a problem concerning what that text says. When I thought what you had said, that the verse said that he got revelation from, Jesus as well as the scriptures. That's what I thought I heard you say concerning them. That's why I asked to see the verse.
I did, because that's what Paul says literally in his texts.
Okay, so he says. So that's why I was asking the one that says that he says he gets it from Jesus and the scriptures, and you mentioned this verse.
Well, no. I mean, you asked about. Okay, see, I don't know. Maybe I've got to go back. Maybe I misheard or something like that. But
no, he asked about the human
was,
thing.
Huh?
He asked about the human. The verse you just read. That's what he asked for.
Right. So that, and then the 1 Corinthians 15:1 through 8, where he talks about, receiving or things, coming to fruition according to the scriptures. I mean, it's what it talks about in Mark. The very first part of Mark talks about the scriptures as being like a fulfillment of the scriptures, and not like some kind of human source or anything. So I mean, I don't understand. Like, did you want Paul to write it down more times that he got it from the scriptures, or?
No, I don't think I want anything
concerning.
I'm not looking for things concerning what Paul writes. I'm just simply reading what he's saying and taking what he's saying and interpreting him as he wishes to be interpreted.
How do you know that he's wishing to be interpreted that way?
Because I'm simply reading the text and examining it. It's from just simply one at the English, then from the Greek, and also understanding the historical context in which certain phrases are used that would differ from how we use them today.
Okay, well, I mean, what it comes down to is that you feel that he's saying that Christ fulfilled these prophecies in the scriptures, and I'm just simply reading the words on the page.
And I'm reading the words too. For I passed unto you.
But I mean, you're putting things onto those words. I mean, you're
doing the same thing.
Are you
obviously
exegeting or eisegeting, CA?
I believe I'm exegeting because
Okay.
I'm going, like I said, reading the words that is mentioned, and even going as far as to exegete by going to the grammatical historical method of exegesis concerning these passages. So I read the verse when I first read it, when we brought this up, and I didn't get what your interpretation was upon reading this. And in fact, I believe I was the one that brought it up. So I don't see where it says that he's trying to borrow and base his information from scriptures rather than and how Paul would be, as if I was speaking as a skeptic, that this is just simply him viewing it in his theology, that he would see this as some sort of fulfillment of something that he has been well dedicated in his life to, and believes that this is a fulfillment of Old Testament scriptures.
Okay, so let's go with that for a second here. Let's say that it does mean like in fulfillment or whatever. How does that cement Jesus in history?
Because it mentions the issue of a Christ figure dying on the cross, and that he was buried.
Okay, well,
and that this is the earliest statement we have of that.
So you're saying that can't be either given through revelation or that is not in the Old Testament, like in the scriptures.
I believe that both are revealed in the Revelation, but I'm saying even from going to a secular perspective, if I were to be a secularist examining this and ignoring the superstitions, like if I were to read Tacitus and Josephus and all the others and ignore their beliefs while focusing on trying to get to the history of other events, then, if I do that, then I think I'm doing an accurate reading of history.
Okay, but still, my point is that there's nothing here that actually says that a literal on the earth Jesus did these things in fulfillment of Scripture. All I see is that that according to the Scriptures, like in fulfillment of the Scriptures, he died, he buried, and then in fulfillment of the Scriptures, he was raised the third day. This just tells me that they used the Scriptures, and from the Scriptures, they pulled these particular prophecies about the Messiah. This doesn't actually connect to a physical person on earth. Do you understand how I'm going about this?
I don't see how you're coming to it, but I'm listening to what you got to say.
Okay. I guess it's just a basic difference in opinion here. You
Right.
see a physical component to this, whereas I do not.
Okay. Understandable.
Let me ask a quick question, and we're going to get into Q&A here in a little while here. What do you think there's more evidence for and less faith? Do you think more for the actual existence of Jesus or his divinity? And I will ask you both of you, because I think it's a fair question to ask both of you. If you had to make a case, you say, okay, you look at, there's probably more evidence for one than the other. You don't have to accept either one, but just objectively, which one do you think there's more actual evidence to be examined for? You can go first, yeah.
Concerning what has more evidence concerning between the two of Jesus' existence and his deity?
Yeah.
Good question.
I try.
Well, I guess ultimately I would just, to me, that makes it sound like I'm answering yes to both would be the historicity. Because just establishing the existence at that point, then I could probably.
But can you be a little more specific by what you mean by historicity? I mean, what specifically about historicity? What evidence are you using to say, look at it, based upon historicity, this is more, this has more evidence. What are you evaluating?
I'm evaluating based on how we conduct history of ancient figures today, and examining, for example, other mentions of them, rather early depictions, or any of these other issues, as well as even some eyewitness sources. even if we have issues like nothing that's written about the person until, say, like with Alexander the Great that was mentioned once, about about 300 years until we get like a biography or anything that's written about him.
So you're saying his existence is more likely than the divinity. Then you're going to pick that horn.
Well, I would say the issue focuses on the existence, because there's people that try to interpret it a different way. But even then, for why I would say that sort of is an answer to both, is because then it focuses on the acts of Jesus and what he's done.
But I only want you to pick one horn of those. I'm giving you a disjunction for a reason.
You can't have one without the other, though.
Well, I'm just saying which one's more evidential. I'm not saying which. And you can't have one without the other. He can exist and not be a divinity. Right.
Right, but I'm also not trying to compromise on my beliefs, and I'm saying that would be a more consistent and comfortable answer concerning everything that surrounds what complies with that answer and what follows.
Okay. Godless, you want to try to
go the other way, though. He can't be a divine.
He can't be divine and not exist, right? I mean, you could say there's more evidence for it, but obviously if he's divine, he still exists in some way, right? So I would say that his divinity entails existence, but his existence doesn't entail divinity. Fair enough?
Well, for me, I find anything that's supernatural to be far less probable than anything natural. So if I had to rank those two, it, of course, would be historicity and then divinity right below that. And if I could in any way put divinity underground, like 6 feet under, like that would be where I would put it. Sure. But as far as the historicity goes, it's not my position to definitively prove that he did not exist. What I'm saying is that it's least likely that he actually existed, considering all of the context around like the Jewish faith and historians that were writing and everything. So
sure,
I think that historicity is more probable than divinity, but I also find historicity to be barely probable.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, obviously, like if historicity is true, then there's a possibility he was divine. But if historicity is not true, then obviously he can't be divine. You have to have one as a necessary prerequisite for the other, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you guys have any anything else that you want to put forth before we go into the Q&A? Real quick.
Closing statements or something?
Just a little summation.
We'll do that at the end. We'll do your closing statements after the Q&A. I just meant like for the sake of the main discussion. Did you have any more points that you wanted to hit on real quick, or are you ready to just go straight into Q&A?
Yeah, we got a couple of questions from the audience here, ready to go.
All right. Okay, so I guess one thing, since it's apparently the only question that was left unanswered from our thing, is just a quick thing. You did mention Philo concerning the issue of Mark getting his information. Where do you get that information that Mark is pulling from Philo of Alexandria, the Hellenized Jew?
I didn't say that Mark was definitely pulling from there. I know in reference to Mark, I was saying that he was using an earlier source, maybe Q. What I said in reference to Mark was just that Philo was writing earlier than him about this Jesus Messiah figure.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, wouldn't you say that, a Messiah figure type of person? Or are you saying that he was I haven't read Philo personally myself. In detail, you're saying a Jesus figure was named, or that a sort of Christ or Messiah figure was named?
Well, no, he was talking about a Messiah figure who was also named Jesus. If you look at the Septuagint of Zechariah 6, I believe it is, if you look at the Septuagint version of that, then you will actually find that the Septuagint actually names this Messiah figure Jesus.
In Zechariah chapter 6?
Let's see. Zechariah chapter 6, and yeah, he describes it exactly like Paul describes Christ. But you've got to go to the Septuagint version of it, which is the Jewish version of the Old Testament. For those of you that don't know, it's often considered to be a bit more accurate than the actual Old Testament.
Well, it's a Koine Greek version of the Jewish scriptures. I don't know where they say it's more accurate. It's definitely the earliest that we have of some of these things.
Well, I mean, accurate being like closer to the actual source, I guess, or closer to what was actually written down. Whereas, the Old Testament has multiple different versions.
I mean, what about the Dead Sea Scrolls? And since from what I've heard, those are those are the earliest manuscripts we have, even though the Hebrew is sort of different in terms of dialect.
Right. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's actually really interesting because you have multiple different things that pop up there. You have other gospels that pop up. I believe, I mean, I haven't looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls in a while, but I want to say that like several different gospels were actually discovered. I believe the Gospel of Judas, was it?
It was.
It was discovered. Yeah, Gospel of Judas was there, where it paints a completely different picture of the Jesus-Judas dynamic. And you have other apocryphal texts that were left out of the Bible, even the Catholic Bible.
Right.
Let me stop you right there, Gossinger, because that's a good point. We had a question that says it hits on that very point. It says, how do apocryphal texts bear on this discussion, or does it at all? So that would
Yeah, well, I would say that that's very interesting. If you go to the Gnostic library or whatnot online and read the actual text, you will find that there are several instances of Messiah figures that are recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have very different versions of them, which actually, I don't know. You guys aren't monetized, so I guess I won't be risking you guys. There's
what you guys say, man. Yeah.
there's actual texts about Jesus that are apocryphal and they're not included anywhere or whatnot, but it actually has legit, and I'm not bullshitting you, Christian Anarchist, you can go and look this up for yourself, man.
I'm fairly familiar with these issues about the Gnostic Gospels.
Okay, basically, there's a reference elsewhere where there is a certain piece of literature about Jesus where he basically takes Mary, I believe it's Mary Magdalene, up to a mountain and fucks her, comes inside of her, and I think at one point he pulls another person. Oh, okay. No, sorry. It's been a while since I remember it. He goes up to a mountain, pulls a woman out of his side, fucks her, comes inside of her and reaches inside and takes his cum out, eats it, and then looks her dead in the face. Looks Mary dead in the face and is like, "You do this in remembrance of me." And it's just a fucking weird ass text that exists.
Wow. Okay.
Well, now I know my
not safe for work warning 5 seconds ago.
Traumatized by that.
Yeah, that was a not safe for work warning that for about a minute back. So maybe we'll add a little thing
right now.
Yeah, we'll add a little thing on the screen after this uploads.
Just when you think these,
we almost made it to the end too, didn't we?
Every single show, I say this, that I've heard it all now, and there's no way that can be topped. And yet, every single show, I find myself at some point saying, "Well, I've heard it all now. You can't really top."
Wasn't expecting that.
Wait till the Calvinism discussion. That may be something.
Whew. Okay, so Christian Anarchist, how do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, there's different types of gospels that have been made. I mean, I've known about this for quite a while, but they don't get within the first century from what I have examined on some of these issues. They come from at least 2nd century to 3rd century, with exception to the Gospel of Barnabas, which is a medieval forgery that was made to appease a Muslim audience. That's why they have a lot of what's written in there similar to the depiction of Jesus in the Quran. So I'm familiar with that. There is a lot of people, there are so-called gospels and such. But I still don't think this invalidates or should allow us to see in sort of a skepticism. I think that these were people trying to get their theology out there, and the one way they would do so is associate it with a name that is popular in Christianity, say as Judas or Peter and all these other different gospels that are out there. But the one thing I notice also is that these canonical gospels that we have, that they're from people that would be ridiculous names to choose if you're trying to go for some sort of popularity or trying to win over people. So I think that that's something to be considered, is the fact that, why mention Matthew? Barely got much of a thing. Why not mention Peter? as the gospel according to Peter, since he's one of the main figures, or Judas, since that's an interesting take on what his perspective was, since we didn't get to hear too much of Judas and know that he has a significant role in the betrayal of Jesus or these other figures. Why mention Matthew or John or even Mark, who is not even someone that was with Jesus, or even Luke, who wasn't with Jesus? Why use these names of so?
Well, it kind of makes sense they would hide Judas, though, wouldn't it? Because you wouldn't want anything that any kind of his testimony associated with the good news. I mean, that would just
Right, and
be.
that's yeah, and that's where there was definitely an issue with them deciding to use that name for their specific gospel to push out their theology.
Okay.
Just to add a
Sure.
little bit onto this, there were multiple like Messiah figures in the first century, just in writings in general. So, I mean, they didn't all use the Jesus moniker or Christ moniker. A lot of them had slightly veiled names and whatnot. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there that they didn't all just use like Jesus and all these popular names. They legit had like these weird, I guess, beliefs about sort of a Messiah figure coming to save them. And that was a common theme in the first century.
Okay. For Godless Engineer, why would first century Jews make up a dying Messiah story, which would have not helped their case in any way if they were making up a story? Also, knowing that it would be blasphemy and they would be put to death. Using Paul, we see that Christians did die at his hands.
Well, yeah, I mean, they did die at his hands. But also, I would say that but like human blood magic is more powerful than animal magic. So, I mean, that's one thing to consider here. But also, you have the scriptures that predicts, the passion of Jesus and predicts the death and resurrection of Jesus. For the Jews, the only way that they really knew how to atone for their sins or whatnot was by sacrifice. So I don't really see it being like embarrassing or anything like that for them to have a Messiah figure that dies, considering that their texts say that he will die in order to atone for their sins. The fact that their Jewish traditions would say that something has to spill blood in order to atone for sins. And you actually do see that mimicked in the Gospels, like with the choosing between Jesus and Barabbas. That is a perfect, transposition of the Yom Kippur thing, where you would sacrifice one and let the other carry the sins of Israel off into the wilderness. And so you see that in the Gospel of John, he has the Last Supper taking place right before Passover, so that when he is on the cross, he's being sacrificed at the exact same time as the sacrificial lamb would have been killed. And so, I mean, you have these various different kind of, I guess symbolism, various pieces of symbolism in the Gospels that reinforces this idea.
And Christian Anarchist, anything you want to tag onto that?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. I guess I'm assuming this one's going to go to you. They didn't say Christian Anarchist, but the question is, if we are taking multiple witnesses for the existence of Jesus' divinity as stronger evidence than a few, are those who claim to witness Jesus after his actual death evidence of the supernatural, and if not, why?
Well, I don't expect some people to take it as evidence of the supernatural. I see that, there are people that claim to experience all other kinds of things. But, today we can examine and just see it's part of the natural world that worked. It's just my particular belief that I see it as based upon the supernatural realm, among other things. But though, I'm not giving my testimony out here. I'm just going to simply respond to the answer that's been mentioned. Or the question that was asked. So, I mean, I think it's depending on how you would sort of take it with other things and, make that conclusion for yourself. I think ultimately they just point out to the existence of a Jesus figure that, existed, and that, according to them, that he did these things. Rather they want to believe it like I do, or they want to do what other historians do concerning the issue of Tacitus, Suetonius, and other ancient figures and what they had written down in their life. Like, for example, as Gary Habermas notes, that the Greek Herodotus blended legends and anecdotal material into his histories, while another Roman, Levi, allowed for the operation of omens. They can mention these sort of things, but if you want to be a naturalist and examine and see Jesus as being a historical figure, you can also leave out for you these things. But I could still see the existence of Jesus. But ultimately, to get to the answer, I don't think that ultimately it demonstrates it. I think that is for extra investigation on the person's part that is looking at this stuff.
Okay. Anything you want to tag onto that, G?
Well, yeah, all I got to say is that supernatural things are far less probable than natural things. So if you were to be considering any kind of supernatural claim, you have to consider natural explanations that circumvent the supernatural claim. You have to consider those to be far more probable and just more likely in general than the supernatural thing.
Okay. Next question is to you, G. It's a tough one, but I think that you'll be able to handle it. It says, would you be willing to do a series refuting the New Testament Gospels called The Gospel According to John?
I would actually love to see this, honestly, from you.
Well, I have considered, going through like Mark and pointing out like each prophecy that is in the Old Testament and how it maps to the New Testament and the claims in the Gospels. Because like I said, in Mark, it starts out with reciting, prophecy in Isaiah, talking about, John the Baptist preparing the way. Well, it doesn't. Of course, the prophecy doesn't name John the Baptist, but it just talks about preparing the way for Christ, basically. And so, like, I mean, that completely resides on Old Testament scriptures. And it's, I hear a lot of people say, oh well, this particular book of Isaiah or chapter of Isaiah doesn't reference Christ. While I believe that there are two different ways to view that, because there's the way that we know Jewish Christians or Jews in the first century were interpreting those passages, and then we know what the actual context of it is now. And we can't really judge like what we can't judge which books were prophecies or whatnot based on our own criteria now. We have to get in the mindset of those BCE and CE Jewish Christians and Christians in that time period. And with the existence of Philo, which for Christian anarchists, if you want to go and read part of Philo, it's on the confusion of tongues is where he talks about the Messiah figure. We find that they were obviously reading prophecies in the Old Testament, but that's also why we have 4 different gospels that preach different kind of theologies. They're similar, but they're not exactly spot on. So I mean, you have these different these different kind of ways that they present the information. But you have to consider what the Jews were interpreting at the time and what we actually have physical evidence for, and that one of those pieces would be Philo and how he interprets the prophecies.
I would like to say, first of all, I am very impressed that you were able to discern that answer from that question. Okay. Christian Anarchist, interesting question that I think is a good one.
I might have an interesting answer then.
Well, let's see. I remember that you promised to sweep me off my feet, so let's see if you can do it here.
Oh, well, we'll try.
Is being willing to change your mind a virtue?
Is being willing to change my mind a virtue? Of course. I think we've established this in the last time I came on here that, I've had many times I've changed my mind on things, and I think that's a virtue, is to be open to things. So, I've gone from Arminian to Calvinist. I've gone from King James only advocate to accepting that all different kinds of translations, as long as they're consistent with the Greek and the Hebrew, that they're acceptable to be used. I used to be from universalist to the eternal hellfire position, as we discussed on the other show that I was on. And then
you don't like commitment, right?
Right. I think that but I do think that there's a line to be drawn concerning. I think believe it was Spurgeon that once mentioned, that a person that ends up constantly changing his doctrines usually has some sort of a loose foundation. So I don't think it's a constant change, but I do think that sometimes ideas should be challenged, and seeing what exactly the evidence is that's out there. In the same way, this is just me speaking. I don't speak for all Christians. That you have issues concerning how the universe started or how did human beings come. We had ideas for a while until, more things like, for example, the evidence for the things that are laid out of evolution are there, and then people are looking at it and coming to different ideas, and they're changing their, positions, especially within the church. Whenever Darwin came up with the theory of evolution by natural selection, even the church, like Asa Gray, for example, who was one of Darwin's friends, accepted the theory, and so did the other members of the church, including Benjamin Warfield, who was a conservative and practically the founder of the term fundamentalist. He was a affirmer of theistic evolution, and that was fine within the church. So even the issue about the origins concerning science or theology, even that can tend to change in things. So I'm willing to examine and change my ideas if something comes up that manages to actually convince me.
Good answer.
Yeah, I believe I kind of caught you in that a little bit on Twitter, didn't I?
Wait, on what?
Well, you had posted a picture of some Egyptian drawings and said that they were.
Oh,
Hebrews.
Yeah, I thought that it were because I've been watching the Reformed Apologetics Ministries documentary on debunking Black Hebrew Israelites, and I just heard the term Asiatics, and I was not familiar with the term until you had brought something up. So I said that, this is one of those cases where I'm willing to change my mind. I took the tweet down and just put the picture up there with the statement of accepting correction from you. So even I'm willing to accept correction from people that aren't just necessarily my brethren. There's some people that may frown upon that, but it's simple that we're human beings and we're willing to learn on certain aspects. That's personally why I think it's good for us to have these discussions like you and me are having right now.
We could maybe get into this into the after show, which would be probably about 20 to 25 minutes. But I
only if Rags shows up.
If only if who shows up?
Only if Rags shows up.
I can invite Rags. You want me to invite Rags? He's
Sure.
probably watching now. Sure. Okay.
Dang.
I can't
Now I'm
guarantee.
nervous.
I can't guarantee he'll show, but I'll certainly invite him. But I have to kind of put it what Ozzy was saying, and maybe put forth this question: is the ability to change? Is the willingness to change really a virtue, or is it more the ability to change one's mind? If you're a docastic and voluntarist, where you think that we don't actually necessarily have the ability to willfully change their beliefs, I can't believe right now, X to be true. I can't will myself to do it. Right? The belief kind of comes to me naturally, and then I assert that. Yeah, it gives me the information. I believe X to be true, or something, right? That or P to be true. So, would you say that's more? That somebody has the ability to have somebody who has the ability to change one's mind is more of a virtue than just the willingness, because it's not so much the willingness to, it's we all will change our opinion given more information, but it's the fact that our beliefs are changing and that we are going along with the ride for that. I don't think we have the ability to actually change our beliefs. Well, there's two states of stating it. There's dostastic voluntarism and dostastic involuntarism.
Well, I'm sure he understood it. This is about them. Let him answer that.
Okay, so the thing is whether or not the being able to change your mind is a virtue.
Yeah, the willingness is no. So the question was, is the willingness to change one's mind a virtue? And as Ozzy's saying, and I'm parsing it out. It's not so much the willingness to change one's mind, is the ability to change one's mind, which is virtuous.
Right. Well, I definitely find it a virtue. I mean, obviously, I'm an atheist, but I live in northern Alabama. So, I mean, I've changed my mind on the religious question. And to be honest, before I started looking into like the actual evidence for a historical Jesus, I mean, I thought that there was a person at the center of it. Like, I thought that there was a Jesus figure that started everything. Like, I had no problems with that. But it's only when I started critically looking at the evidence that I had to be like, well, there's no evidence to say that Jesus actually existed. And I mean, even now I'm caught in predicaments where I've said something that I can't necessarily back up with evidence, and I have to be like, fuck,
Every day.
I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have that happen to us, right? But that's good. We do self-assessments, right? That's how we formulate better, stronger positions. And I'm not a mythicist, but I won't die in that hill. I just right now I believe that probably was some person named Jesus. But again, given more evidence that, and my brain changes that belief, that I'm fine with that. I mean, I don't really have a dog in that fight. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I agree with that sentiment. It doesn't matter one way or another to me if Jesus actually exists in history. My position is that I think that it's far less probable that he did. But I mean, if somebody can provide actual evidence for it, then I'm all for it. Which I know probably Christian Anarchist is like, I've provided you loads of evidence for it.
It would change your whole outlook on life if you found out Christ did exist. It doesn't change it doesn't make a difference to his divinity or not, is what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah,
And
okay.
a lot of people make the assumption that like it's integral to like my personhood or something like that I not believe that Jesus actually existed or something like that. But it's really not that serious of a thing. I am passionate about the question, but that's because of the position that I held once before, because I found myself in a position where I was lazily just being like, oh yeah, there's probably a guy. But I mean, it's all about what can you show? What can you prove? I believe it was Aaron Ra that said that if you can't show it, then you don't know it.
Don't know it.
And huh?
I was just repeating with you.
Yeah.
Everybody repeat the mantras. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that expression, but that's okay. We got some other questions we got to get to.
It's
All
a
right.
good expression. But by the way, I want to put this out there to everybody. Guys, Christian Anarchist touched on what I think would be a really interesting debate. So I'm going to do something a little different, and I'm going to put this out there to you guys. If there's anybody that would like to come on and debate the King James version of the Bible, somebody that
Sweet Jesus.
somebody that believes in only the KJV version, and somebody who doesn't think that the KJV version is the only one that you can use. I think that would be fascinating, and I'm interested to hear. So I'm putting that out there to you guys.
Yeah,
you
you probably may have an aneurysm by the end of that debate, because I've debated that multiple times with people, and it's you meet some interesting folks.
If I can make it through a flat Earth debate, I can make it through a KJV debate.
Touche.
But so tweet me. You can send a DM, NonSec Show, or email us at live@nonsexshow.com. Okay, we got a couple more questions. This is for Godless Engineer, and I think Godless Engineer, you touched on this a little bit. So I'm not sure how much more you can expand upon it, but how do you explain the conversion of Paul and the loss of skepticism for Peter and James?
Okay. Well, I mean, of course, like I said before with Paul, if you consider the possibility of him being a schizotypal, where he could have these visions, and it's been shown that cognitive dissonance causes people to force themselves almost to have these visions. So I think that he was possibly suffering cognitive dissonance as he was persecuting the Christians, as he says. And then, in order to overcome that, he had a vision because of his schizotypal nature. It's been shown, with studies that schizotypals, in order to overcome the feeling of cognitive dissonance, they have been known to hallucinate themselves, but also schizotypals are also drawn to religious groups. because of the fact that they have these visions and whatnot. So they're more readily accepted. Whereas we would probably give them medicine, the religious people would, think that they're a prophet or something. So I mean that explains that. As far as the Peter and all of them not being skeptical anymore, I don't really think that has like a lot of bearing on it. I think that they can believe wholly in Jesus as Christ and everything like that, and think that he was a real person, and remove all skepticism. I mean, we see it every day, with people in general. So I don't think that that's really a big holdup on like mythicism or anything like that. And so yeah, I don't know what else I can say about it.
Okay. Anything you want to follow up that with, Christian Anarchist?
9.
Okay. I'm going to let you go into Raging Bull mode, Godless Engineer, because we have a question again about the supernatural. For Godless Dude, is the supernatural not probable when assessing the witnesses of the supernatural? It not hard. Does the supernatural exist? Well, here are people that say it exists. Well, the supernatural is not likely, so they're likely wrong.
Who wrote this one?
This is from Andrew Ritchie.
Okay.
I guess he's wanting to know why you can't why don't you just come out and say whether or not the supernatural exists or not?
I think it's more specific. I think he's
thing.
actually asking, why don't you believe the supernatural exists because other people say it exists? That's the way I'm reading that question.
Okay. Well, I mean, for every supernatural thing that we have considered in the past, we've always been able to explain it with natural occurrences. It has not been the case ever in history where we have had a supernatural explanation that has trumped a natural explanation. It's always been the other way around. The natural explanations have always trumped and replaced supernatural explanations. So in the same vein of like how I know my car will start up in the morning is the same way that I know that I guess the supernatural hasn't been shown to exist, so therefore I don't expect it to just start existing. Is it possible that tomorrow something supernatural could happen all of a sudden? Sure. You would need a lot of evidence in order to back up the supernatural happening. But just in the same vein as, my car, it could possibly not start in the morning. That's been the case multiple times with me going out there and my car not starting and me being like, fuck, how am I going to get to work? So I'm open to the possibility of it, but for, just like with my position on God, there has been no evidence to show that one exists. So therefore I don't believe in one. I just simply don't believe that the supernatural exists because I have not seen any evidence. And I have to say, I watch ghosty shows every night. So if there was something, I'm sure they'd capture it.
There's 3 people in here without gods, but can we ask you kind of a similar question? Why do you think it's more probable to believe a supernatural explanation in some cases over a natural?
Why do I believe it's probable to believe that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously God and Jesus would be a supernatural claim. Now, again, I don't like defining supernatural. I think it's hard to define it. I let my interlocutor if he wants to talk about supernatural, I'll let him define it.
Which is not natural.
Yeah, but that's a trivial thing. I mean, natural, not natural. What does it mean to be not natural, though? But why do you think it's more probabilistic that some of these supernatural claims of miracles are true rather than, as John is saying, the more likely naturalistic explanations could be observed only naturalistic? And I'm not advocating his position. I'm asking you this as a question, though.
Right. I think it depends on the person sometimes, because mostly I see what happens usually is that they have some sort of experience that they have of it. But as God's engineer had mentioned, for some people, then they can try to explain that from the natural realm. And there have been times that that's been done, but at the same time, there's been certain things that have been mentioned that doesn't seem to get that scope of being explained by that. So, normally then the response is then we wait until something, just because it says that it's supernatural or that it's we can't know it now, doesn't mean we can't discover the cause or anything like that later on down the line. So we just consider it a mystery. And to some people, they just don't see it that way, and I don't think they will ever stop seeing it that way. And I think that's just mostly, I think it's like a presupposition, like a worldview starter thing, is that they believe that there's something more than just simply the natural world, that they don't usually identify what it is until something along the way comes. So I think why it's probable is that it usually depends on the person ultimately.
Okay.
Steve?
Yeah. One really quick follow up, just on John.
And then
John
I got to
here.
use the restroom after that. So if any
we're going to
closing
be
statements
wrapping
are
it
to
up. So
yeah.
So let me ask you, Godless here. Would you think if you saw something, let's say like all the stars aligned and it spelled out the name Yahweh in the heavens? Now, granted, there could be some alien technology that did that. Let's be realistic. There could be other naturalistic solutions if you want to say that aliens. But do you think that somebody, if there was something to that magnitude, the stars, or even better, the clouds opened, Jesus appeared on a winged horse with a trumpet going, I am Jesus and I am here, second coming. Would you think at that point it might be justified to believe in the supernatural, or would you still go, hey, yeah, I'm checking that out, but it's got to be either a hologram or it's got to be aliens? What would be your first instinct there? And if somebody else just said, look, I do believe it's Jesus, would you fault them for having that belief, or do you think it'd still be irrational?
Well, as far as that goes, I want to give a comparable situation. There are several magicians and whatnot that make like ships disappear and elephants disappear, things like that. I think that you sometimes cannot just take what you see as legitimately what is happening. Because we are hindered by our own perception, but that is also why we have these various processes that allow us to actually figure out what was going on. Like, with the disappearing elephant, there could be mirrors or whatever. There's a trapdoor or something like that. I mean, my go-to thing is to be skeptical. So if I were to see that like happening in the sky or whatnot, I would try to wait for evidence of why that happened or whatnot. I would try to wait for evidence of that proves either that it really did happen or the real reason behind it. I take the exact same approach whenever I see something that's strange, like on social media. Like if I see one of those fake news posts that you really don't see anymore because Facebook kind of cracked down on that. But, when you see those and you see like, oh, Donald Trump sucked on a donkey dick. And so, you gotta wait until you can.
But nowadays you can't tell the fake news from the real news, because you read stuff and you go, "Oh, that's got to be fake," and then you find out, "Oh shit, that's true." We're in that day and age now that the abnormal news is the norm.
You know what's funny?
Right.
If he actually did suck a donkey dick, the evangelicals still would support him. There's nothing that he can do to break that support. It's fascinating.
Well,
Hey,
I know.
hold on a second. You got an evangelical in the room here, and you're mentioning that.
Oh, well.
Which again, I still have to notice that we're using this, and I probably still got relatives watching this.
Oh, well, yeah, I understand that. I mean, we don't have to go into that, but I'm just saying in a general sense that despite his, obvious adulterous ways and, the controversy that surrounds him, you can't break. And when I say evangelicals, I'm not talking about the sane ones, obviously. I'm talking about like the what's the guy's name? Jim Baker. Mm-hmm. Those types.
Food bucket man.
The ones that you see on TV all the time, still spouting off that he's God's gift to.
Wait, Jim Baker's on TV?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You have not seen his
he
buckets.
sells buckets of food. It's like $88 for and I guess like 40 meals in it, but still, I don't think I want to eat 44 meals out of a bucket.
Yes.
The only time I really heard of him was when Dr. Michael Heiser went on his show. Other than that, the guy was like, who is this guy? That's pretty much all he was to me.
He was the thing back in the day, though. He was the thing.
Apparently he hadn't made a big impact to let me know who he is.
We'll send you some video clips of
You're
him.
probably too young, but back then, him and Tammy Faye were they were the number one. They're like Joe Osteen now, or they're actually bigger.
Wait,
but
isn't Baker the guy that got caught by the wife while he was giving a rub down to some guys?
No. This guy, he went to prison for tax fraud. But the other scandal with Jim Baker was that he went, he had paid some prostitute. I can't remember her name, but he went on a skiing resort, and all that came out. But he was like Joe Osteen back at that particular time. Like, he was huge, and when he fell, I mean, it was a big blow. But yeah, he's back on TV. He has his own show again, and he sells buckets of food for when the earth ends. He wants you to be prepared with lots of food in buckets. So yeah, check that out. I got to thinking about Jim Baker.
I'm surprised he doesn't remember him, because he was so big when I was growing up.
He's probably too young.
During the 80s and 90s. I mean,
24.
the whole Tammy Faye, Jim Baker scandals were just every day.
It was the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, it was the 70s and 80s.
70s and 80s.
But it was just bizarre. Oh, it's Jessica Hahn you were thinking of.
Yeah, Jessica Hahn. That's it.
Bizarre. It was like every day there was something scandal going on in the church.
Guys, do you want to go ahead now and give a couple minutes to kind of wrap up your points? That's all the questions that I have on my end. And I want to say, first of all, thank you guys for a fascinating debate. I think this went well. We didn't, center too much on one particular thing and covered, I think, many different aspects. So that was really well done. We started off with Christian Anarchist first last time, so let's go to Godless Engineer to kind of wrap us up on your end, and we'll go to CA.
Okay. Well, just for me, basically, I believe that it's far less probable that Jesus was an actual historical person, considering all of the evidence that shows that the first Christians actually considered a celestial Jesus, and you see Paul writing about this celestial Jesus, along with Ignatius of Antioch, along with the Ascension of Isaiah. All of these early Christian works. Ignatius wasn't an early Christian work, but he was reciting a gospel that we just don't see now. So, considering all of the earliest information that we have centered around the time of Jesus, it seems more likely that the original theology was that he was celestial, and that is how he defeated, death, basically, and provided a new kingdom. So there's that, and I do believe that I have a lot of evidence to support my reasons for not accepting the other external evidence for it. So, there's that. I would love for people to find me on Twitter at Godless Engineer, and have a conversation with me over the existence of Jesus anytime. And you can find me at Godless Engineer here on YouTube.
And Christian Anarchist, before you go, I want to say that reminded me of what I was going to say before Jim Baker took my thoughts. Go to Twitter anytime from now until 23 and 58 minutes from now. There's a poll up on the NonSequitur Show account. Do you believe in Jesus? So it's kind of a follow-up question from this.
Is that do you believe in he exists? Or
I was just thinking about that. I probably worded that really wrong.
Yeah,
I'm going to fix that. Do you believe Jesus existed?
The historicity. Yeah, okay.
I'm not putting hysterectomy on there. But
did Jesus have a hysterectomy? I doubt that he did. But that would be a whole different discussion.
Give me 2 minutes, guys, and then that poll will be up there. I worded that really wrong. I just realized that. And so while I do that, Christian Anarchist, we'll roll with you.
All right. By the way, once that poll is finished, and the next debate that we do on that whole Jesus mythicism thing, that will be one of my appeals to authority, is that poll. But in all seriousness,
was that a jab?
No, it's just I need to get more appeal to authority that I need to grab, so I'll grab onto some of those. Anything I can get. Grab away. So here's what I'm ultimately just saying is that, throughout the discussion that we've had, I've mostly heard, that it's more probable or probability being used more so than the issue of an assurance or a certainty of the existence or the non-existence of a figure, as well as some of the things that were provided, say the issue of Josephus and Tacitus and all these other things. I don't think that personally, and I don't think anyone else should, just simply rely strictly on a probability, but rather what is the evidence that is there and based on the issues that we can see from what the scholars are saying. Not saying just rely on them simply because they got the PhD level, but rather we should examine what it is they're saying and then actually, take, because they'll cite their sources. So that's why whenever I cite a scholar or anything like that, I mention that so that people can then go examine what he wrote, look at the sources that are mentioned. And ultimately, I think that's what it is that from what we have told you, you have to examine the claims and the evidence that we have provided, and it is up to y'all to make the decision on whether or not if Jesus existed, and what y'all then do with that information is entirely up to you. Whether you believe that he didn't exist and you take some of the different theories that are out there about mythicism, or if you accept that he is Christ, will you take, say, the Bart Ehrman or the Jesus Seminar approach, or the Christian conclusion and following up in not just what Christ's existence is and the works he's done, but also with the gospel that he preached and what his followers have believed truly in what he does, which I would recommend, again, to read the gospels for that. So I will, if anyone wants to communicate with me, I'm on Twitter, Christo_Anarcho. I got a YouTube channel, as we mentioned earlier, just Christian Anarchist. And you can check the links there. You'll see there's a Discord server I have that'll get you the link to join in for that in case you want to do discussions like that. And since this will definitely be a certainty, I will at least say, is that we'll be doing As Christian Anarchist. For certain, no storms interrupting at this time tomorrow, Friday at, I believe we're doing it at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time as usual.
So Ask Christian Anarchist is back?
For finally, since the storms have left.
Hoorah.
Excellent. Well, guys, once again, thank you both for a extremely well done debate. Thought it was fascinating. We are doing a after show hangout on Steve McRae's channel, I believe.
Yeah, we'll plan it for 7:30 my time, which is I think 10:30 Eastern, so about 20 minutes. We'll get you guys a link.
Once again, thank you to those who supported the show tonight and the guys we have on Patreons. We are in the process now of setting up a Discord community. The Patreons will get the first. We'll kind of do like a beta run thing to kind of figure out the rooms and how we want to do the voice chats, because we want it to where a lot of talk, I think, takes place after these discussions are over, and I think that's a perfect place to kind of have those a continuation of the various discussions that we have, and then to push new ones and to keep things going during the week. So that will be, we're hoping to shoot that out May 1st. So bear with us on that. And thanks Jamie again tonight for your support.
And I think he'll be joining us for the
that's
after
all I
show
have,
too,
Steve.
by the way.
Any last words?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think Jamie's going to be joining us for the after show. I'll invite Rags. CA's asked for link. If John's got plenty of time, I don't know what his plans are.
Well, yeah. I mean, I got some time.
I'll send you the
Casey's still plugging away.
Yeah, and bring her along too. She's actually has higher views than you get.
She can't come, Steve. We flirt with her. We flirt with her too much, Steve.
Yeah, clearly that was the case yesterday.
She can't come.
Scary. Okay, so anyways, let's wrap it up, guys. I do want to thank both of you. I think this was actually a really good discussion. I got to admit, the first part went a little bit over my head, but you guys seem to have a good dialogue between each other, and the second part especially I really enjoyed. I think that was what we missed in the first dialogue that Godless Engineer had with IP, was the New Testament kind of stuff, and I think that, to me, is far more interesting than try to go back to the Old Testament kind of stuff. So anyways, I will see you guys in about 20 minutes. I will set up the after show on my channel, get out the links.
And to Christian Anarchist's family watching, sorry about the donkey part.
And I had nothing to do with it. Can't blame me.
That was all me. I take full credit.
Good night, all.
Bye, guys. We'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock.